Combat in Elden Ring is quite similar to Dark Souls. However, if you're completely new to a game like this, then you might find it a little bit difficult. In this video, I'll tell you everything that you should know about Elden Ring's combat system, and hopefully this will help you get better at the game. Before we can even talk about combat, you need to know about the equipment system. You have 6 slots to equip your weapons, and these slots are split between your left and right. Your main weapon should always be equipped in your right armament slots. This is because the right bumper or R1 button is your light attacks, and the right trigger or R2 button is your heavy attacks. You can place a weapon in the left slot, but you'll only be able to perform light attacks with the left weapon by pressing the left bumper or L1 button. Pressing the left or right buttons will allow you to swap between any weapons you have equipped in your weapon slots. Speaking about heavy attacks, there's 2 ways you can use them. You can either press the heavy attack button or hold down the button for a charged heavy attack. Obviously, they both have different timings. One can deal more damage than the other, and you consume more stamina. However, depending on the weapon, some can have different attack animations as well. You might need to keep that in mind for whenever you're fighting something, even though I barely use heavy attacks. Holding Y or triangle and pressing the left or right back buttons will allow you to hold a weapon with 2 hands, depending on which weapon you're holding on either side. So if you press the right back buttons, it will be the weapon you have on your right hand, and vice versa. Holding a weapon with 2 hands changes quite a lot of things. It increases the amount of damage that you do. You can guard with the weapon by holding down the L1 or LB button. It increases your stamina consumption when performing attacks, and your attack animations are changed as well. However, some weapons just have the same attack animations whether you're holding the weapon with 2 hands or not. Unlike Dark Souls, in Elden Ring, you can perform jump attacks. Jump attacks are really good for stunning your enemies, especially if you're using a weapon that doesn't hit hard like a greatsword. However, there are some enemies that don't get stunned by jump attacks. Jump attacks are also good for easily breaking an enemy's stance. When their stance is broken, you can go up to them and press the light attack button to inflict a lot of damage. This attack is known as a critical attack. However, some enemies' stance has a high threshold for them to get stunned, meaning that it could take a long time for you to stun them, and probably by then the enemy is already dead. Now, if you equip yourself with 2 weapons of the same weapon type, one in the right slot and one in the left slot, you can perform a unique attack when pressing the L1 or LB button. They both have to be the same weapon type, otherwise you'll be performing the same usual light attack with the weapon in your left hand. Whenever you perform attacks with a weapon, you will always use stamina, whether that be a sword, a staff, or a bow. As long as you can attack with the weapon, stamina will be used. This means that you gotta be careful whenever you're fighting something, because you don't want to be out of stamina when you need to evade an attack. Also, if you haven't already done this, you should always lock onto your targets. Pressing R3 or the right stick will allow you to lock on, and when you move the right stick while locked on, you can change targets. You might also come across an enemy where it's better to not lock on, but majority of the time, lock onto your targets. Let me talk about dodging. Obviously, dodging takes up stamina. Your dodge is dependent on your equipment load. The lighter you are, the faster and more fluid your dodge is. Dodge. That sounds weird, I don't know why. Basically, if you have a heavy load, then your dodge will be so slow that it looks like a turtle could probably outrun your fat chunky ass. No offense to the big people out there. Dodging also has iframes. The word iframes is short for invincibility frames, and it basically means that when you're in the moments of your character performing a dodge, your character becomes invincible. This allows your character to survive against any attack that would be lethal. However, as I said, this only works when your character is in the duration of a dodge, and if the enemy's attack isn't a continuous stream of attacks. Also, you're gonna be dodging past the attack. If you're rolling into an attack, then it's just basically you running into the attack. Knowing this allows you to think about closing your distance while dodging past an attack. Don't just think about evading an attack as a way to distance yourself from the enemy. Think of it as a way to close your distance rather than backing away and missing the chance to deal damage. By the way, jumping away might seem like a good way to dodge, and that might work in some cases, but since jumping doesn't have any iframes, then you can still get hit. Another thing that you should know is that when you dodge and perform a light attack straight after, you perform a different attack animation, and obviously you consume a bit more stamina. This also applies to when you attack after sprinting for some weapons. What I tend to do is after a dodge, I wait for a split second for my character to get out of the dodge animation and attack straight after, allowing my character to attack just like normal. You should also use sprinting as a way to distance yourself from an enemy, rather than spamming dodge to distance yourself. Depending on the enemy, I try to dodge past their attacks to get behind them to get a backstab. Most of the time, if the enemy is some sort of human, then you can backstab them. To backstab an enemy, all you have to do is press R1 or RB when you're behind them. Doing this not only helps with inflicting massive damage, but it gives you the chance to heal yourself or teabag right in front of the enemy. Okay, but don't do that, unless you know that you can win. Pressing LT or L2 will allow you to use your weapon skill, which will drain your FP meter. You will find that some weapons will have the same skill as another. These skills can be overwritten if you equip an Ash of War on the weapon. Equipping an Ash of War can be done at a site of grace. Throughout your time playing, you might come across these wet blades. These wet blades can help with applying affinity to your weapon, along with the Ash of War. As you can see, I can apply all of these affinities along with the Ash of War. But depending on the Ash of War itself, some affinities are not available. Applying an affinity will also change the stats of the weapon, which can change how the weapon works. I like to apply blood or poison so that the weapon can either cause blood loss or poison to an enemy. Some weapons that you find will have unique skills tied to them, and you can override their skills with an Ash of War as well, but you wouldn't want to get rid of a unique skill, right? Unless you're some kind of monster that likes to see the world burn, then sure, go for it. Shields! We all know what a shield does. Equip it in your left slot and block attacks with it by holding down the L1 or LB button. Blocking attacks will drain your stamina, and when your stamina hits 0, well, just get ready to die. Stamina will slowly restore as long as you're still holding down the block button. So just stop blocking and your stamina will restore like normal. You might find that you still take some damage after blocking an attack. That's because each shield has their own stats for blocking damage against specific attacks. For example, the shield's physical damage negation is low compared to another shield, meaning that if I block an attack using the shield with low physical damage negation, then I'll take damage while blocking. Whereas if I'm using the shield with high physical damage negation, then I'll completely block an attack without taking damage. However, if I'm getting hit by a magic attack, then it's going to be a different kind of situation. After blocking an attack, you can perform a guard counter. This is done by pressing the R2 or RT button straight after blocking an attack. This is really good for breaking an enemy's stance, but the enemy can stop you from performing this move if they attack you again. You can also do this if you're holding a weapon with 2 hands. Parrying can be very difficult for someone who can't time things. Yes, that's me included. The thing about parrying is that not all shields can be used to parry. That's because parry is a skill, and you can get the parry Ash of War. The parry Ash of War says that it can only be used on a selection of armaments, which just means that you can't parry with a hammer. That would look weird though, parrying with a hammer. You can get the skill from the War Master Shack, and you'll see this guy selling it. Anyways, as I said before, whenever you equip a weapon on your right slots, that will be your main attacking weapon, meaning that you can attack with a shield, but you lose out on some things. Things like backstabbing and performing a critical hit when their stance is broken. But hey, no one can stop you from beating the game with just a shield. It is possible. Now, magic in this game comes in 2 forms. You either have sorceries or incantations. Both of these have offensive and supportive spells. The only difference between the two is that sorceries can only be used when you're holding a staff, while incantations can only be used if you're holding a sacred seal. To use a sorcery or incantation, you must have either staff or sacred seal equipped and press the light attack button depending on which weapon slot you've placed your weapon in. Whenever you use a spell, your FP meter will be used, so once that drains to 0, you won't be able to perform any more spells. You might also notice that you can't use some spells, and that's because you don't meet the requirements to use it. As you can see from the spell, I can't use it because my intelligence stat isn't high enough to use the spell. This can be the same case for some weapons, and that you won't be able to use it properly with your current stats. You can still equip the weapon, but the damage that you do with the weapon will be decreased. And in some cases, you won't be able to use the weapon skill. However, if your stats are somewhat good enough, the game will tell you that you won't be able to use the weapon properly unless you wield it with both hands. Moving on to light bows, great bows, crossbows, and ballistas. To use any of these weapons, you must equip an arrow, great arrow, bolt, or great bolt in your arrow or bolt slots. Light bows, great bows, and ballistas work the same way. Whenever you attack with it, you instantly hold the weapon with two hands. Holding down the L1 or LB button will allow you to manually aim. Pressing R1 or RB will fire the arrow in the first slot, and pressing R2 or RT will fire the arrow in the second slot. This is the same for crossbows, but for you to manually aim with them, you will have to hold the weapon in both hands yourself. It's also very simple to know which arrows or bolts belong to which weapon. Arrows work with light bows and bows, great arrows work with great bows, bolts work with crossbows, and great bolts work with ballistas. Finally, the last thing I can talk about is non-physical damage and resistances. Non-physical damage, or what I like to call stuff other than getting slapped from a sword or a bear pouncing on you, all have their own defense stat, and this is determined by your gear and the attributes you've leveled up. For example, my stat says that if I get hit by a lightning attack, I'm gonna take more damage than I would if I were to get hit by a magic attack. Enemies also have weaknesses to something, but you just have to figure it out. As for resistances, it is also the same for both player and enemies, and I think it's pretty simple to explain. The more you get hit by a status effect, the higher the bar rises, and eventually you will get that effect. There's quite a lot of effects that are quite similar to each other. Poison and rot will gradually deplete your health. Rot is by far the worst one. You don't want to get hit by that. Blood loss and frostbite will take a chunk out of your health, but frostbite will also allow the target to take more damage, and their stamina consumption is increased. Sleep will obviously put the target to sleep, allowing you to perform a critical attack. Madness will drain your FP meter, and you can inflict a lot of damage. And death can just straight up kill you. Death kinda looks cool though. You can increase your resistances depending on the stats you leveled up, equipping armor, and using items. I think that's all I can talk about in terms of combat. Now I might be missing a few things like poise. That's only because I still don't understand poise. But either way, the things that I've said here are just the pure basics or things to know about Elden Ring's combat. Hopefully you found the video useful in some way. Be sure to smash that like button and subscribe because that would really help me out. Thank you for watching and have fun in Elden Ring. That's not fair. Yeet. Oh.